Hey guys, want to do kind of a quick video about 20 gauge. Just got done filming my video on my 20 gauge survival shotgun, and I wanted to talk about the caliber in general because I know it's going to generate a lot of comments about 20 gauge, and yeah, a lot of people feel it's kind of a dead caliber and it's not as good as the 12 gauge, and I want to talk about it and discuss a little bit here. So of course we know the 20 gauge is not as powerful as the 12 gauge. You're talking about 3/4 of the power. So, but you're also talking about 3/4 of the size. So I think what you give up in size, you lose proportionally with power. It's not a disproportionate loss at all. So I think that's an important thing to note. The 20 gauge is very capable. You're talking 1,500 plus foot-pounds of energy. That's more than enough to take a man. That's more than enough to take a deer. You know, you could probably even take small bear with a 20 gauge. You know, it's not my cartridge of choice, absolutely, for a bear, but for deer, it's absolutely fantastic. Bear, you know, it better be a pretty small one. You know, there's no small game out there that a 20 gauge can't make short work of. Just very, very useful. And let's be honest here. The 20 gauge has the same amount of energy as a 30-30 round. You're talking the same power. No, it doesn't have the same ballistics. Of course, the 30-30 has better ballistics. But power-wise, they're very similar. Which, in that case, while you're talking about it, it has the same power as a 7.62 by 39. So when people say that the 12 gauge is really, the 20 gauge is underpowered, I kind of laugh because you're actually looking at the same foot-pounds of energy as a 7.62 by 39. When people say that, it really shows that they don't pay attention to science. They just kind of talk out of their ass. There's a lot of power there. No, it doesn't have great penetration. No, it doesn't have good ballistics, but it's not a rifle cartridge. It's a shotgun. It's not meant to be shot out 200-300 yards. It's not meant to penetrate more than, 15-20 inches. That's all you need. For man-sized, deer-sized game, 12 inches of penetration is all you need. So it is very capable, despite what people say. If you look at charts of muzzle energy, you'll see. But you can't really compare the ballistics of a shotgun and a rifle and expect. But 12 gauge and 20 gauge, yeah, that 20 gauge doesn't have the ballistics of a 12 gauge, but typically with a shotgun you're shooting at less than 100 yards anyway. So we got that whole thing. And I know a lot of people get hung up on it, and it's a completely fair thing to get hung up on, but the 20 gauge is absolutely very capable. Whether it's defense or hunting. Next thing I want to talk about is availability. During the ammo shortage of 2013, 2014, I was always able to find 20 gauge. Everywhere I went, always had 20 gauge. Because it is out of vogue, it does give you a lot more capability to find it. And a lot of people went back to 20 gauge as a result. So I do want to point out, the next big major ammo shortage could be around the corner. 12 gauge disappeared for a while. There was a couple of months where I couldn't get anything except birdshot and 12 gauge. This, 20 gauge wasn't the same. I could still get buckshot, I could still get slugs. That's really important, and to me, for a survival gun, I like the idea of having 20 gauge and having the ability to ride out ammo shortages like we had 2 years ago. So that, to me, very, very important. Firearms. This is where, 20 gauge takes a ding. Not everybody offers a 20 gauge. Like my Weatherby PA08, they don't offer it in 20 gauge. Now the Mossberg 500 they do, yes. The Winchester 1300, yes. The Remington 870, yes. But not everybody offers a 20 gauge. So you are limited in the firearms that you can buy to support the 20 gauge. It's unfortunate, but it is one of the downfalls that you're kind of limited. The other thing is accessories for those firearms. It's very difficult to find 20 gauge accessories. A lot of them are just 12 gauge accessories that you just kind of make work with 12 gauge, which is really disappointing, especially when it comes to side saddles and things like that, where you have a really loose fit. It's not good when you're trying to put together something for survival purposes that your life's going to depend on. But the upside is because 20 gauge is so out of vogue, you tend to find a lot of 20 gauge stuff on clearance, like I did. I found a lot of stuff that was half off, 3/4 off, was able to go and put together that survival shotgun for very cheap because 20 gauge just doesn't have the demand. A lot of these small gun shops go and they buy accessories for 20 gauge. They sit around for 6-8 months and they put them on clearance. So you can clean up and get, especially when it comes to the Mossberg 500 and the Remington 870 and the Winchester 1300, you can get a lot of those 20 gauge accessories for cheap because people just they aren't buying them. So there you go there. Of course, you have the whole size thing, 20 gauge. You can carry more, you can carry more rounds. It's that capability thing, you know. Do you want more rounds or fewer rounds with more power? Now, for me, I don't live in an area where we have, you know, gigantic grizzly bears. You know, the bears we have in New York generally don't get much bigger than 200-300 pounds. They're pretty small and they're pretty timid. So I don't need a bear gun, you know. I don't need things. We really don't have a lot of predators, and the ones we do are very, very shy of humans. So for me, the big importance of a 20 gauge is small game and defensive uses, which it has a lot of capabilities for that. Now for you, okay, if you live in Alaska, I probably wouldn't go with the 20 gauge. It's probably not for you. If you live somewhere with, you know, mountain lions and things like that that could attack you and kill you, 20 gauge may not be for you. You know, it is one of those things. It's not for everybody. It works for me. I live in the Northeast. For me, there's a ton of small game. There's not a lot of predators. We have a lot of, you know, around here we have a lot of duck, a lot of geese. We have a lot of partridge and pheasant and things like that. 20 gauge makes sense for me. I can carry a lot of rounds out into the field. It's not as heavy as 12 gauge. Which brings me to that last point I want to make, which is the user. Now, ideally, I love 12 gauge. My preference is to 12 gauge. You know, it's what I grew up with. It's what I've been using forever, you know. But in reality, when it comes down to it, my wife cannot shoot 12 gauge all day long. She can shoot 12 gauge. She can shoot, you know, 50 rounds through it. But beyond that, she's done and she's going to be bruised. Plain and simple. Even me, you know, 50 rounds is a little rough on me. You know, getting up, putting 100 rounds through will leave me pretty sore. 20 gauge is a lot easier on the body. It's a lot easier on people who are smaller, younger, maybe have disabilities or problems, health problems, you name it. That 20 gauge can be absolute dynamite for someone like that. So for me, I find that the 20 gauge to be a great household caliber because I do have a wife, I do have a kid, and I'm not just going to throw my kid into a 12 gauge and laugh when the gun knocks them over. You know, it's not being responsible. It's about having that smaller gauge and working them up to it. Likewise, my wife loves the 20. If we go out and we're shooting clay pigeons or something like that, she prefers to have the 20 gauge. It's more comfortable for her. She can shoot it for longer and it's not as punishing. So there's a lot of good things when it comes to 20 gauge, and you shouldn't just discount it because 12 gauge is better. Yes, it's bigger, it's stronger, it's, you know, it's got better ballistics. There's so many things. But when you look at 20 gauge, it's just as capable. It's not as punishing. And like I said, you can, you know, there's so many good things. You can find it in ammo shortage. You can find cheap accessories. You can find cheap 20 gauges. My God, if you go into a gun store and there's a cheap used gun on the rack that's collected a bunch of dust, 9 times out of 10 it's a 20 gauge. The other 10% of the time it's like a 16 or a 28 gauge that nobody really buys anymore. So I find it to be really useful. It's a great thing to have in the house. You know what, even if you love your 12 gauge and you think 12 gauge is the best thing on earth, I think it's a good idea just to have that 20 gauge for the next ammo shortage. So there you go, guys. Little food for thought. You know, you don't have to buy a 20 gauge. I'm not your mom. I can't tell you what to do. I just want to give you some ideas and get you guys thinking. And remember that next time you roll up on a gun shop and there's that cheap $100 20 gauge, it might be worth taking a second look.